Welcome and thank you for being here with us today. My name's Anita Stuhmcke. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of Technology, Sydney. I'd like to acknowledge that we are today having our informal chat on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to acknowledge that these lands were and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm proud and excited today to have the inaugural UTS Alumni Thought Leadership interview with a focus on law and technology. Welcome to Nicholas Saady. Nick's going to share today his thoughts on law and technology. He's an associate at Pryor Cashman in New York. So one of the reasons for asking Nick to come along today is to allow an opportunity for an international and a global perspective on the legal profession and how law and technology is impacted in terms of one's legal career and choices. Nick's a broadly experienced litigator. He's represented high-profile organisations and individuals in complex intellectual property, commercial and sports law disputes. Notably, he's currently representing Meta against Facebook in a trademark infringement case and involved in litigation regarding the first ever NFT. He also represents many notable influencers, media personalities and startups, including Aussie startups. So thank you very much, Nick, for being with me here today. I'd like to cover law, technology, the importance of the international experience, and I think the place to start is with your history. So Nick, somehow you've transitioned from UTS Law and Sydney to New York. Could you explain how that's come about?
Yeah, so I had a bit of an interesting path. I obviously, when we were back in the other building, as we were talking about previously, an amazing environment. This building is quite different, much newer, obviously, and a great place to be. But when we were back there, I sort of really had no intention to go overseas and study. I sort of went through the traditional path here, and then went to Freehills, was working there for a bit, and then over time, with the help of some great people here at the faculty, particularly Jill and Leslie, started thinking about going overseas to study, postgraduate study. And with the help of people like Jill, Leslie, I was engaged in the Rhodes process, got to the final few, fortunately didn't get through, but that happens. And then started to think about my other options, and sort of that was a bit of a loss for me. I wanted to study overseas, and once you prepare for so long for something, it's a pretty long process. I used that sort of feeling as a bit of motivation, and started talking to people that I knew, and speaking with them about what I really wanted to do and where I really wanted to go, and felt like New York was the place. And so I did everything I can to get over there, everything I could, to get over there, and was very fortunate to get there. It was hard work, sort of going through all the scholarship processes, applying at different institutions, which is actually separate process, so it's quite complicated. But again, with the help of the people around me, particularly people here at UTS, was able to get over there, and been a fantastic change for me.
And Nick, what's it really like? Is it like Suits, being a lawyer in New York?
It's a little bit like Suits. I guess there's the same sort of pressure and strategy in litigation. The work environment's pretty colourful too, but I would say that it's not really like what they make it out to be in TV. There's a lot less fun than they seem to have. But it's overall, it's an amazing experience, right? It is. There are a lot of similarities between practice in Australia and practice in New York. There's different parts of it too, but I think more so in the US, the cases tend to be more high profile. There's more money on the line, so like the $1 million cases here are $1 billion cases in the US. So I think there's some differences in that sense, and also I think the media has more of an active role, particularly in litigation. Everything's sort of in the public eye, which is a very unique experience. Whereas here, I think the media and the law are a little bit more separate. You'll get the big cases that are in the media, but day-to-day cases generally don't have the attention that they have in the US. So it's different in that sense, and that's one of the things I really like about it, to be honest. You get used to practice here, but then when you go over there, it's like very New York has been very, I think, vibrant for me and very like conducive to the personality. So
No, that's really interesting. And
yeah.
just a question on that. Is it an easy thing to transfer the skills that you, learnt, of course, at UTS, but also in practice in Australia, and take them and apply them in a different context?
I think Australian universities in particular, and legal practice generally, equips you with great black letter skills, like great analytical skills, ability to read legislation, the ability to interact with clients a lot as well, especially as a junior lawyer in Australia. I had great opportunities, and that sort of, I think, equipped me with the skills that I needed, because that stuff doesn't really change once you go over. Obviously, the substantive laws are different, so it was like extremely challenging going and figuring out like civil procedure and evidence and that sort of thing. Yeah, and different court system, like the idea that some federal courts in the same circuit, district courts, don't bind each other is like a foreign thing. And like you have even having different circuits is a foreign thing. Like here you have the federal court and everyone sort of binds each other, even if they're in different states, right? The full federal court its decisions have authority, wide-ranging authority across different states.
So how did you do that? How did you get across that? How did you manage to access a system that, for many graduates, and probably many people practicing in Australia, it's such an interesting job that you have, and we'll get to that in a moment, but what was, I guess, the challenges around trying to access and become skilled, which you obviously are, to now doing litigation in a major New York firm. Yeah, exactly.
It was a lot of work, right? So I was fortunate to go to NYU. It's an excellent education there. I learned from some great professors, like all the best litigation-focused professors were there.
And did you do that as a transition?
Yeah, I did it as an intentional thing. I sort of figured out who was there. Like Arthur Miller is one of the greatest civil procedure professors in the world. So learning from him, Daniel Capra, evidence, they were two of like the leading persons in their fields. And so like I had a bit of intention, and obviously going into it, and then use that education as like a bit of a base, and then did my own work from that. I think legal education is different in the US in the sense that there's more focus on the grey area. Education here, I think, is more about teaching the law and how to apply the law. Of course, that occurs in the US, but it's more focusing on those grey areas. So lectures will focus on like the dispute between judges or circuits. And so there's not as much of a focus on that here. I think it's a more practical focus. And there's obviously pros and cons to both. But I think they're the differences. And it was interesting for me, like there's partly on me to do it, but also obviously I had a great support network around me. And the system is really set up, like the bar is set up as well to make sure that everyone has the requisite understanding of the law and is able to apply it. So I think that also helped too. And then in practice, you obviously learn as well. Always learning.
Always learning, absolutely. And it's interesting you're talking about that support network, because again, just going back to this idea of taking what's Australian education, now re-educating in some ways to be across a familiar yet different legal system, and then managing to become part of a dynamic, scene of litigation, etc. Like that idea of having that support network, or, how, could you explain a little bit about how that's a useful thing? I can see, Nick, just, talking to you, of course, you're going to be a support network as well for other people. So that's a really interesting part, I think, of your, experience and how you've been where you're at.
And I think like having mentors is pretty critical to success, right? And also not only success, but also living your day-to-day life, right? Having those people to bounce ideas off, whether they're like professionally related or personally related. So I think that's important. I sort of realized pretty quickly the importance of that, particularly in the legal profession. And so really was intentional about building that network. And it sort of flows into practice too, right? Now, like with clients, I'm doing the same sort of thing. Obviously in a different sense, but I think for me as well, I understood the value of that early on, and so sort of tried to, and I was lucky with people like I said, Jill and Leslie, who sort of helped me and guided me throughout the process. I worked a lot with two barristers that I played cricket with, Ian Neil and David Chin, and they were great to me. Like they really, like, I don't know, I turned up as a 13-year-old playing cricket and they started talking to me about the law and I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting.
That's interesting about extracurricular, isn't it?
Yeah,
like,
you
and
never
what that
know,
part,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. So, and then obviously, because I understand the value of that, I'm more inclined to help others and sort of act in the same sort of support role for them. And so I often speak to people that are looking to transition over to the US, and even just working domestically involved with the mentoring program here and the mentoring program at UNSW. So,
which is great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I'm always happy to help out. I know it's pretty, like, it can be tough a lot of the time, especially when it's all sort of the unknown. And I've done it. I've been there. So I'm willing to impart my knowledge. And I know the value of it, like I said. Like, it's just so important.
And actually on that too, I mean, so it'd be great to have more time, you know, to comb through your cricket career, and I mean, there's so much there. But in terms of now looking ahead, and law and technology is, of course, such a disruptor or a challenge or an opportunity as well, I think, for the profession. So looking ahead, what do you see to be the challenges? You don't necessarily, of course, have to focus on law and technology, but what do you see as some of the things that we need to be aware of as we progress and as we go forward for the legal profession, for law students, just in general? Yeah, blue sky thinking.
Yeah, I think so there's two parts to it, right? For people in the tech space, I think they're really trying to figure out how the law is going to affect what they're doing. Like, technology really has like endless potential, as we're seeing now. And so figuring out where the boundaries are as to what you can and can't do, I think is going to be a pretty interesting development. And then that sort of feeds into what's happening in the law itself, right? And so we're seeing, particularly in the US, seeing a lot of like legal action, so litigation, generally in two areas, like in the blockchain space, you'll see with a lot of regulatory action as well as some civil proceedings. The civil stuff's more around like the NFT space. We mentioned the case we have at Prior, as well as there's a big case involving Nike and StockX and Meta Birkins and Hermes, the fashion brand. So
And what
I think,
particular?
well, so how traditional laws, so the latter two cases dealing with how traditional laws like trademark, copyright will apply in the NFT space, because it's not in real life, right? And so how a lot of it's in the metaverse. So a lot of how those traditional legal principles apply, and we're seeing judges seem to be treating it much the same way. And so that's going to develop. We're going to get more insight into how those traditional laws apply. And on the regulatory front, I think through that sort of action that's taking place, also understanding like how regulators sit and how they see these issues, looking at like whether, for example, NFTs are securities, or how traditional securities laws apply in the crypto space. And so a lot of that's happening in the US, but it's also happening here in Australia. And obviously across other jurisdictions, and particularly the EU's been particularly active. And so I think we can all get insights from each other and figure out how that's going to develop and how it should develop. And I guess, not to labor it, but the big thing for everyone right now is AI, right? And that is good and bad. Some of the stuff it can do is quite worrying. But yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it's quite funny, right? Like, you have ChatGPT, and then there's a program that identifies if you use ChatGPT. So it's like, okay, we can like sort of cancel. Yeah, exactly. It's going in circles. But that is particularly interesting to sort of see again how like traditional laws might apply. So copyright, there's a lot of talk in the copyright space now, particularly in relation to AI-generated art, and now with AI-generated music. It's a hot topic. I recently wrote an article with one of the big music litigators in the US, James Samataro, who's at my firm, and looking at sort of what sort of copyright issues arise through the use of AI in music. It's super interesting, even just writing the article. So,
we were talking just recently around this, and ChatGPT has been recognised as a co-author.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's interesting.
Really,
from a copyright perspective, the issue is open. I'm going to comment much.
Well said.
But yeah. But yeah, it's a pretty cool space to be involved with, and I think that's going to keep developing over time. So you're seeing that sort of stuff emerging within academia as well?
Absolutely. It's very much at the forefront of people's minds in terms of it's almost exactly that question. Do we incorporate it into our teaching and learning? Can we? Or do we look at regulating it? And or is there some sort of,
Middle ground,
middle ground. And it is what you're talking about. I mean, law and tech in terms of education has so many challenges. Yeah. But Nick, thank you for talking with me today. I think it's just such a wonderful exemplar of where a legal education and of course a UTS law education can take an alumni, and I'm sure you have amazing things ahead of you, and I won't ask you to commit to this right now, but I'm looking forward to re-chatting with you perhaps in a few years' time to revise, review and look at what the next stages and the challenges are with law and technology.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much, Anita.
Thank you, Nick.
Appreciate it.